All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And this is kind of our maiden voyage using our Cisco Secure Public Safety Portal to do these webinars. I don't normally do a prior to session webinar or anything like this, but there is so much interest, obviously, in the turnover and leadership of the General Assembly and the introduction of a number of bills that in the past have failed or not been considered at all. Erin, by the way, is helping me. She'll be muting your mics if you don't mute them yourself, so we don't have a lot of crosstalk. So just some other sort of housekeeping. This particular webinar, it's being recorded, and we will post it on our website. When you go under the resources link on our website, the very first tab says advocacy. And when you go to that page, you'll find not only the bill list, the Excel spreadsheet that we're going to keep updated. You'll find the webinar for this. Also, this PowerPoint I'm using has links in it. So we will post that there as well so that you can utilize the PowerPoint to access some pages on the website for LIS that make it easy for you to find some things. So all that being said, we also have a chat window. You can post some questions there. I've set aside an hour. I don't know if my formal presentation will take an hour, but we'll keep the chat room open as long as people have questions. And if for some reason you think of something later, please email me, because this is a session where we need a lot of input from our law enforcement community. I think that it'll be very helpful to the VACP Executive Board. The Executive Board meets on December 13th. And one of the things we're going to be doing, which is a week from Friday, is to spend some time on the legislation. Generally, we get a lot of questions about our positions on bills, and we try to be very careful about taking positions where we think there might not be consensus in the membership. And I think that'll be true on a number of these bills. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Just for those of you who are kind of new to the legislative process or new to being able to look up stuff online, we want you to know that every year the General Assembly sort of enhances what it makes available on the website. The first link that you should be familiar with is just the Legislative Information Services website, lis.virginia.gov. Again, I'll post this PowerPoint so you can have these links and be able to go to it. And then you can look up individual bills there. You can check the meeting schedule. If we have time at the end of this webinar, I'll navigate a couple of those pages and show those to you. It also gives you a pretty good idea of how to follow the course of a bill, when it goes through committee process, how it's amended and so forth. Right now, on the website, when you go and you look at, the bills that have been introduced, there is a link you can go to that's just all bills. And so when you go to that, you can kind of go through in numerical order. What I have done for these purposes is just pull out the bills that are of importance to law enforcement. If I've missed any, if you go on there that you think is of importance, you all need to let me know so I can add that to our tracking list. So anyway, the pre-session calendar is located at the link that's shown on the screen. The first day of session is January 8th. Now, there's a lot of other deadlines within the session that will eventually be posted, but the House and Senate leadership has not met yet to establish those dates. This is a 60-day session. Every other year, in an even number of years, it's a 60-day session, which is a long session. That means this is a budget year. So they will be introducing a new budget. That means also that not only is that about money, but there's always budget language that goes in bills in the budget that dictates things like particular instructions to agencies or a variety of things. Those are language amendments. Remember, those die with each budget. And so we also watch the language amendments that get introduced, because those may have specific instructions for the public safety community. So we'll be tracking that as well. So that being said, the key information too that you should also know, we have 18 new House members, and there's a photo page of those new members that's at that link. The new Senate membership has also been posted. If you don't know who your legislator is, there's actually a link on the Virginia General Assembly website that's just who's my legislator, and you can figure out who your senator and delegates are. It's important because those are the people you all need to be talking to about legislation that's of concern to public safety. All right, the legislative process, the request for bill drafts, redrafts, all the other corrections to legislation and so forth, the deadline for that is 5 o'clock on January 3rd. Right now, there's just what's called pre-filing, and those are the bills we're going to be going through, the ones that have already been filed, and that's routinely updated. So as I mentioned before, there's a comprehensive list you can go to. That's what I'll be referring to, and I'll be updating our Excel spreadsheet on the website. That spreadsheet is designed so you can download it as an Excel spreadsheet. Then you can sort it by category or whatever so you can track the bills of most interest to you. There's also a lot of duplicate bills, and you'll see bills that have sort of the same title, but sometimes they're not exactly the same. They may have some nuances of difference. So even if you see a bill that looks the same, you have to kind of go through line by line and make sure that there's not something that's slightly different. During the legislative process, the committees will start consolidating duplicate bills before they refer them to the House and Senate floors. They have to go through all of that to sort of pare down legislation. But as you can imagine, there's always a lot of duplicate bills, particularly because people want to make sure they get credit for past legislation, so they want their names on bills. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about firearms. This is, and I'll mention to you, by the way, there's a lot of I've been getting a lot of questions about gun sanctuaries, and there's some great articles, op-ed pieces that have been put out there. And one of the things that I have just cautioned our chiefs and sheriffs who have contacted me about gun sanctuary resolutions is to just remind their citizens that they don't have the power of law, that they do not shield localities from being responsible for enforcing laws passed by the General Assembly, and that it is up to the courts to decide if a piece of legislation that comes out of this General Assembly is not constitutional. So that being said, we have a variety of bills. This is probably not all of them. I'm sure there will be others. The first one, as you can imagine, is the Universal Background Check Bill. Now, this has been introduced several years. I think it is still going to be opposed by the NRA and the Civil Defense League. They have opposed it in the past. It does have exemptions in there for things like family exchanges, antique weapons, and so forth. So it's not a absolute in every circumstance background check requirement. In the past, the VACP has supported this particular piece of legislation. We will be cautious to make sure that it doesn't get out of bounds, and that it's consistent with current law that requires background checks on purchases. Senate Bill 18, though, is one, I won't go into the deep dive on this bill, but it sort of it raises age limits for the purchase of weapons, some to 18, some to 21. You take a look at that bill and I would like to know if law enforcement has any particularly concern about that bill. House Bill 9, Senate Bill 67, this would require reporting of lost and stolen firearms. It was interesting, the first time this bill was introduced a few years ago, there wasn't a lot of support from law enforcement, but then we started getting some support from some chiefs who said, this would be helpful to know this. And in doing my research, the interesting thing is we actually have a law in the books in Virginia that says that if there are missing explosives, that those must be reported. And so there seems to be some consistency and purpose in also reporting lost and stolen firearms. But there is obviously people who are concerned about that being, too excessive or put some mandate on the general public. There'll be people who will fear reporting that information. I have a question here about Senate Bill 18. I don't see any exemptions for hunting or other sporting events. So if I read it correctly, 16 and 17-year-olds cannot do anything with a firearm unless supervised with an adult. I think you're correct. I think that is the intent of that legislation, that they want minors to be supervised when they're in the possession of a weapon. So again, those are the kind of things where we need some feedback from our law enforcement members to see if we have any helpful amendments. I'm going to just say this generally. When it comes to the gun bills, I think that we're going to be very cautious about taking positions on gun bills. I think for the most part, one of the things that we probably should be doing as an association is where we see a bill that is problematic in its administration or we see some issues with it that law enforcement knows are contrary to other law or whatever, we should be in a position to offer helpful amendments, because in reality, with a Democratic-controlled House and Senate, some of these bills are going to go through despite our best efforts to, and if we're in opposition and we know the bill's going to go through, we may be better positioned to offer helpful amendments. So I hate to sound defeatist, but I'm being realistic, that there are some of these bills that have been around for a long time that the Democrats have been fighting to get passed, and they're not going to go down without a fight. And so I do expect that some of the bills will be advanced to the governor. So we'll just have to see if we can do the best we can to amend them to a acceptable posture. I have been watching most of these bills, and there are, for example, exemptions for law enforcement. And so I want you to be aware of that. Senate Bill 13 is a prohibition on weapons, and this is not just guns, it's weapons, including knives and so forth, in Capitol Square. And there's an exemption there also for law enforcement. Senate Bill 14, trigger activators, in other words, bump stocks. There aren't any provisions there. This is a prohibition on having, bump stocks, but there's no provision in the bill right now for current ownership. I know that one of the things that people in general have been concerned about is any of these bills passing that would result in some activity by law enforcement going around their locality and rounding up guns. And I don't see that as being a practical outcome of any of this legislation. So we will have to make sure that anything that gets passed doesn't put law enforcement in a really contrary relationship with our citizens. And then Senate Bill 22 and 69 are both one gun a month purchase bills. You may recall years ago, and frankly, I was involved with this when I was an attorney for the Crime Commission. This legislation was developed by the Crime Commission, forwarded by, at that time, Delegate Jim Almond. And it just restricts the number of guns you can purchase in a month. Take a look at that bill. There are some exemptions in that bill for, I think, antique weapon collections and so forth. Senate Bill 15, and this is, you'll see a trend here. This is a prohibition on the possession of weapons in state buildings. Again, there's an exemption for law enforcement in that bill. The assault firearms prohibition also includes large magazine prohibitions. And there's a new definition in this bill for an assault weapon. They create a section called 18.2308.8. And again, there's an exemption in there for law enforcement, the way it's written. But I'm sure that this particular bill there'll be a lot of heated debate and certainly a lot of representation from the gun advocacy lobby. Senate Bill 25 is a prohibition on carrying concealed in public parks and consuming alcohol. So that's a little bit of a complicated bill. I don't know if that one will probably get amended and possibly even expanded. I'm not sure, but I do think we will see more bills coming in that will return to localities the authority to pass ordinances to have some restrictions on guns in certain places. That used to be the law in Virginia. It got scaled back, and that authority got eliminated by the General Assembly. Now with the Democrats in power, we may see some movement in that direction. So we'll be watching for those bills as well. Senate Bill 70, it says it expands school prohibitions, but this just adds daycare centers to the places identified as schools where firearms are prohibited. Senate Bill 75, this creates a penalty for recklessly leaving loaded, unsecured firearms accessible to children. And so that's one that I think is representative, and it comes about as a result of some of the issues where we have had children access firearms and then have tragic results. Senate Bill 76 is about protective orders. There's a current, obviously, prohibition on having a firearm when you're under protective order. This one, I think, is meant to strengthen that particular statute. We watched this one very carefully because right now this bill does not require law enforcement storage of someone's weapon if they have to give it up under a protective order, but clearly that's something that we don't want to see as a state mandate. All right, moving into, there's a number of public safety benefits bills, one of which is there's several dealing with workers' comp, and House Bill 44 and Senate Bill 9 are the ones that expand the definition of the types of cancer that are presumed to be job-related and that can be compensable for public safety officials as a result of exposure on the job. So that's I think a good bill. House Bill 45 just is a bill that does not allow retaliatory discharge of an employee just simply because they have filed a workers' comp claim. And, House Bill 40 may not be House Bill 46 is one that is basically says that the employer has to let you know if they are going to either accept or deny a claim of workers' compensation based on sufficient evidence. So that's one that I think we'll see in the Labor and Commerce Committee. House Bill 47 is the one that may not have any application for public safety workers. I went ahead and included it. It deals with foreign injuries being those injuries that occur out of state. So we'll keep an eye on that one, but I don't think that's really of importance to all of you. House Bill 51 expands the eligibility under the Line of Duty Act for children who are adopted or born after the LODA event, and that they would be covered by the LODA benefits legislation. And then Senate Bill 54 is one that we've been trying to get passed for quite a while, and so we're hopeful that this one will go forward. This would allow those of you who retire and want to become school security officers to still draw your VRS retirement benefits. And this is something that's been opposed by a number of groups and is perceived to have some kind of cost to the localities, but we've shown that it doesn't necessarily have to be costly to the localities, but definitely we want to be able to use the expertise of retired law enforcement officers to serve as school security officers, and without them having to have to set aside their retirement benefits for that time period. All right, so highway safety bills. House Bill 17, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 10 repeal the driver's license suspension for failure to pay your fines. And what it does is basically reinstates previously suspended driver's licenses for failure to pay. Let's look at that one. We're a little concerned about House Bill 34. This one would allow you to petition the court 30 days after your conviction and get a restricted driver's license. It expands the current law that allows you to get a restricted driver's license if you're under you've completed one of the BASAP programs or you're under an ignition interlock order. So we're watching that one carefully. We're not sure if the breath test refusal should be a standard for allowing someone to petition for a restricted driver's license. Let me go back. Senate Bill 34. DMV driver privilege cards. This has come up before. The concern we have here is this is generally designed for people who do not have legal status in the Commonwealth, but allows them to have driver privilege cards that are not necessarily the same thing as a resident of Virginia's driver's license, someone here who is actually a citizen of the Commonwealth and the country. So the problem we have there is what kind of valid documents are you going to base a driver's privilege card on? So we will watch that one carefully as well. Senate Bill 63 would raise the threshold for reckless driving from 80 to 85 miles an hour. That is Senator Surville's bill. House Bill 15 would phase in a requirement for seat belts on school buses to make sure that phase-in of seatbelts on all school buses is completed by 2038. House Bill 16 is a primary seatbelt law bill, and this would be primary seatbelt in all positions in the vehicle. So in other words, no back seat exemption, no age restriction, no that kind of thing. Everybody in the vehicle would have to be belted. And then we also expect a hands-free bill to be introduced. In fact, we're pretty certain that'll be introduced. That's the same legislation that almost made it through last year and went through some 11th hour legislative amendments, everything else in the reconvened session. So we're really hopeful that this bill will get passed this time. All right, so moving on to some other legislation. There are a few in the area of criminal law and procedure. There's definitely going to be several bills on decriminalizing marijuana possession. And whether that, how far those go, we don't know. That we have not seen any legalization bills yet, but the decriminalization bills probably have a fairly good chance of passing. What this would do would be make simple possession a civil penalty and would raise the threshold on intent to distribute from half an ounce to an ounce. We expect, and these next two items on here kind of go hand in hand. I expect that there may be a bill put in to possibly repeal the paraphernalia statute. And that goes somewhat hand in hand with legislation that's not been filed yet, but it is being reviewed. And that is the renewal of the needle exchange program. A bill was passed with a sunset clause a couple of years ago. It would sunset, in other words, go out of authority the 1st of July. So the Department of Behavioral Health is looking at getting that legislation renewed to extend the needle exchange programs. When I talked to the folks at Department of Behavioral Health, I said, look, can we delete the language that requires law enforcement support? Because that has been interpreted as being law enforcement involvement that goes far beyond most of our law enforcement officials are comfortable with, especially since we do have a paraphernalia statute. So we'll be watching that one carefully as well. Senate Bill 83 creates a minimum mandatory sentence for brandishing a firearm at a law enforcement officer. House Bill 31, 32, and 50 are all expungement bills. So I'll just go through those real quickly. 31 basically calls for the expungement of convictions for simple marijuana possession, underage alcohol use, and using a false ID under the age of 21. House Bill 32 would take on misdemeanor nonviolent convictions. Once you've served your time, I think it's after about 8 years of your time of your service, that you could request the expungement of both the police and court conviction records. So the court conviction records, but also the police records. And then House Bill 50 allows you to petition for expungement for simple pardons. Now, right now, the current law says you have to have an absolute pardon, and that basically is a standard of you did not commit the crime. Whereas you could pursue through petition an expungement based on simple pardon. I think one of the areas of concern here is how far this goes into expungement of police records, particularly when you all are looking to hire law enforcement officers and you want to be able to do a records check, that even if someone has a very minor criminal conviction, that you want to be aware of that so you can make an informed decision about hiring. All right, so other legislation, disorderly conduct in the schools. This is really, this is kind of a weird bill, but it removes it from this statute. It just takes all the disorderly conduct language that would apply to schools out of this statute, because this is a class 1 misdemeanor conviction statute. Now, what I expect is that they're on other maybe education code statutes to address disorderly conduct in schools and make that, maybe take it back to being something that's more of an administrative responsibility within the schools. Senate Bill 59, this would require the disclosure of juvenile law enforcement records to school officials. Senate Bill 64 is one that penalizes what the senator's calling paramilitary activity. Now, one of the things that it addresses is training for paramilitary activity. I have talked to a couple of academy directors who are concerned that this may interfere with law enforcement training exercises. So we'll make sure that we look into that, and if we need to write an exemption in there that this does not apply to law enforcement academy training activities, then we will do that. All right, the possibility is still out there that Senator Deeds will introduce a 24-hour emergency custody order bill. We have been through extensive study of this issue along with the mental health transportation issue this past year. And it's there was no consensus. In fact, there was a lot of opposition to going to a 24-hour emergency custody order. However, it's possible that Senator Deeds will introduce this bill again. We will strongly oppose that, as you can imagine. Now, the other thing that's not on your list here is we're actually working with the city of Norfolk right now to try to draft some legislation that Delegate Heretic will put in that will create a summons authority for local code enforcement officers. Right now, there's a lot of localities that are using the Special Conservator of Peace statute to authorize code enforcement officers to do their job so that they can issue summonses. Now, the problem with that, we made some major changes to the SCOP statute a few years ago, and it enhances the training and the registration requirements. And frankly, not only is that expensive and unnecessary training for these code enforcement officers, it also means that anytime we go into that SCOP statute and we use it that way, it also enables people in the private sector who are SCOPs to use the same authority in the statute. We don't really want to see an expansion of the SCOP statute in that way. So we'd prefer to have a clean bill that just creates the limited authority for code enforcement officers in the course of their official duties to be able to have summons authority. So if you all have any insight on that one, that's in the drafting process, and we will really appreciate any input from any of you. Oh, and someone, was this Scott Burke, I think, said foreign injuries might be relevant for extradition. So that's actually good to know. Thank you, Scott. All right, so that's all I was going to cover today in terms of the bills themselves. We were posting, like I said, our tracking list on our advocacy page. That's the link there. If you want a bill added to the list, please let me know. Email me, call me, text me, whatever, and let me know if you want to add a bill to the list that you want us to track. Also, let me know if you're interested in testifying on it. We're always looking for expertise to come down to the General Assembly that can speak to the nuances of some of this legislation and bring up points that won't occur to me. I'm certainly not an expert in all these fields, and so we really need your input in this type of legislation. I don't know if anybody has any other questions that they want to post in the chat screen. It may not be occurring to you right now, but if it occurs to you later, like I said, go ahead and email me. We'll try to do this. If you think this is helpful, we'll try to do this more frequently. Obviously, as we see the list of introduced bills expand, then we'll see the additional bills that may be of concern to everyone. I'll say right now that there are several localities that regularly send folks down to the General Assembly, and I rely heavily on state police and some of my other public safety partners down there, and we work together on this legislation. So I appreciate the fact that we have a really good team of folks that work together on this legislation. I also want to advise you that you need to think about your new members in the General Assembly that could be somewhat of a blank slate, particularly in areas of public safety where they may not know a lot of details about the work that you all do. So in that respect, we want to make sure that you inform them. Now I have a question here about any new legislation on illegal Asian massage parlors. I believe that Chesterfield has taken the lead on that one, but if that hasn't happened yet, I'll certainly follow up. I realize that's a key concern in the area of human trafficking, so I'm glad you reminded me of that. I'll follow up and make sure that if there's any legislation that needs to be introduced there, that gets followed up on. So thank you for that. The other area, and I think I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can get this done. Our assault and battery on a law enforcement officer statute has been what we call a Christmas tree law for a long time. It lists categories of law enforcement officers who, if they are the victim of assault and battery, that there's an enhanced penalty for that. And we want to make sure that we clean that law up. And it really should just refer to anybody who's identified as a law enforcement officer and 9.1-101. I would like to consider it a housekeeping bill because right now, some people who are not listed are campus law enforcement officers, which is clearly an oversight and should be corrected. Now, where are we going on? Oh, Queen of Virginia gaming machines. I know that's a big concern. I have not seen any bills yet. I think the jury's out on that one because obviously there's localities that are looking for whatever income from that, but we also realize that this is a huge area of concern for law enforcement in the area of criminal activity. So we'll follow up on the Queen of Virginia gaming issue and see if anybody's going to be putting a bill in. Senate Bill 2, decriminalization. Has the Supreme Court conducted a study over the past 3 years, the judicial outcomes? No, they have not. Obviously, it's something that we could try to track them and see if that's of any influence. But really right now, decriminalization is such a polarizing issue. And they're putting it in for, a variety of reasons. And I think the greater concern I have is if anybody puts a legalization bill in. So, but I'll check and see if there's, anything from the Supreme Court. Private police are not protected under the assault. Okay, and so in other words, I appreciate that, Dennis. If we change that statute to say anyone certified under 9.1-101, that would include private police. Senate Bill 16, what's the plan for LEO exemptions, retired LEO exemptions? Let's see. And that's, I got to go look back here at Senate Bill 16. That is one of the gun bills, I'm sure. We will look for law enforcement exemptions in all the bills that deal with any kind of gun prohibitions. But right now I have to go back and look at that bill and see if it's been overlooked. Keep in mind that, there'll be a variety of gun bills that will, assault firearms prohibition. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is a law enforcement exemption in there. Now, again, operationally, I don't know how that will work, but there'll be a number of bills that will address that. And we'll just have to get down in the weeds during the session and see what happens. Anybody else have any initial questions that they want to hit right now? If not, we'll close this out. Again, this is recorded and you can listen to my ramblings again if you want to. We'll post the recording on the advocacy page under resources on the VACP website, as well as this PowerPoint. Our VACP Executive Board meets December 13th, and they'll be discussing this legislation. Chief Howard Hall from Roanoke County is our current president. Now, also keep in mind that we have a conference coming up in February, and that's February 5th through the 7th. It's a combined conference between the VACP and BACLEA, which is the Campus Chiefs Association, at the Hilton in Sharp Pump, where we've gone a number of times. This is the event registration and so forth is there. We'll obviously be covering where we are in the General Assembly at that time, and that's midway through the General Assembly. So it's a really good opportunity if we see legislation that needs to be corrected, amended, opposed, whatever the case may be. That's a good opportunity to get that input from all of you there, as well as some great training. We have a training committee that's recommended some training for us for this conference, and so we are getting that all put together now. I'll have that agenda posted as soon as possible. The board meeting on the 13th is here at the VACP offices. It's a small room. I mean, obviously they're open to the public, but it begins at 10 a.m. You have to email me if you have any particular interest in that board meeting. And I can let you know what all is being done. We have not agenda for that, but we will be discussing legislation. Anything else here? I think. Anybody else have any questions for the good of the order? All right, well then we will let you go. That was quicker than I thought it would go. I probably bounced over a lot of stuff, but again, let me know if you have some questions about any of these bills or anything else that comes up. We can do this again if folks want us to. We'll certainly though keep that Excel spreadsheet updated on the website. So that being said, I will let you guys go, and if we don't talk to you before the holidays, have a very Merry Christmas. Be safe. Thank you.